We have two esteemed guest speakers with us, which I'll introduce in a moment. But just to give you an idea of the schedule tonight, we will have two presentations, followed by a short break, 15 minutes. The presentations will last about an hour, collectively. On your break, I encourage you to take advantage of the snacks and drinks, and we also have some coffee and dessert in our Kreitner Lounge. After the 15-minute break, which will happen between 8:25 and 8:30, we will have a question and answer session. So we'll set up a microphone, and you all are welcome, as the speakers have invited you to ask questions related to the topic. And in fairness to our presenters, and in fairness to anyone from a different background or perspective, we ask that you keep the questions fair and honest and related to the presentation that we have for you all tonight. So thank you for being here, and let me introduce our guest speakers. So our first speaker tonight is Sister Grace Marie Horan from the Franciscan Sisters of the Eucharist. Yes. We have several other FSCs in the community here, and they just keep coming, which is great. We keep needing more and more. The community is based in Meriden, Connecticut, dedicated to renewing a sense of the sacredness of the human person. And Sister Grace Marie is originally from Texas, where she studied English literature at the University of Dallas. During her years of religious formation, she earned a Master's of Arts and Theology from Holy Apostles College and Seminary, while teaching high school religion at Catholic schools. She also earned a doctorate in ministry, focusing on evangelization, from the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. From 2021 to 2024, she served as an official of the Dicastery for Interreligious Dialogue of the Holy See, connected with the Vatican, and the coordinator of religious education and RCIA at St. Patrick's Church, the American parish in Rome. Currently, Sister Grace Marie is the Director of Religious Education and Youth Ministry at the Church of the Little Flower in Bethesda, Maryland. And our speaker that will follow Sister Grace Marie is Dr. Lawrence A. Kotak, or also known as Rabbi Kotak, or Rabbi Larry, and he is a beloved faculty member of St. Vincent de Paul since 2016. He's also served on faculty at Colgate Rochester Divinity School, assistant professor at the New York Institute of Technology. Dr. Kotak currently serves at the Palm Beach Sheriff's Department, engaged in research, counseling, stress, trauma, and suicide prevention. He's a certified drug and alcohol counselor, and Rabbi Kotak's milestone involves the Nassau Suffolk Recovery, and also serves on the U.S. Congressional Commission on Drugs and Drug Education. He has served as a Foreign Affairs Advisor to 5 members of Congress. He has served on panels at the Hastings Center for Bioethics Research, focused on the pressing issues of medical ethics, bioethics, gun violence, homelessness, nutrition, and food insecurity. He holds degrees from Rutgers College and Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion. Rabbi Kotak also holds family therapy counseling certifications from the Long Island Jewish Hospital Hillside Psychiatric Center. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to our guest speakers tonight. So without further ado, I invite our first speaker, Sister Grace Marie, to come up and share her presentation with us.
Thank you, Deacon Ari. Well, first I just wanted to thank the seminary community for having me here. Thank you to Father Hernandez and Father Cusick for the invitation, to Dr. Dennis for helping to organize the Committee on Ecumenism and Interreligious Dialogue, and Rabbi Larry for your presence here and sharing your wisdom with me. Earlier we were able to have a meeting, and it was just very wonderful. And just also, thank you to the diocese for those who helped organize this event, and just everyone who's been so warm and welcoming. So as Deacon already said, my name is Sister Grace Marie, and I'm here speaking with you today mainly because I had really the blessing of serving in Rome in the Dicastery for Interreligious Dialogue for 3 years. And I'm just really happy that the seminary and the diocese wanted to have this event to commemorate the 60th anniversary of Nostra Aetate, because I think it's a document that is still not very well known among Catholics and just in general. The way that the Catholic Church has been reaching out to members of other religions, I think is really, really beautiful, really prophetic, and a path forward in our world, which is so full of conflict and violence. So I'm just really grateful to have a chance to speak with you just a little bit about Nostra Aetate, and I'm really just scratching the surface of interreligious dialogue. So I hope that there's some little kernel that I say this evening that maybe you could learn more about, or something that inspires you to learn more about the Church's teaching on interreligious dialogue, or just to learn more about other religions and people who have different backgrounds. I wanted to begin with a story from my own spiritual tradition. So as you heard, I'm a Franciscan, and this year we celebrate actually a Jubilee year of St. Francis, because we're commemorating the 800th anniversary of his death in 1226. So St. Francis was actually a prophet of interreligious dialogue so many years ago. Now, Nostra Aetate was really groundbreaking, really revolutionary for Catholics and just for the world, because the Church, in her highest authority, began to teach that we should be open to people who are different, and we should learn how to respectfully dialogue with them. But St. Francis was doing this 800 years ago, and actually other saints and holy people throughout the centuries have had this kind of open attitude towards people who follow other religions. So just a really brief story about St. Francis. He lived in a time of the Crusades, and he really did not agree with this way of trying to solve problems, I suppose you could say, because he was a peace-loving man, and that was one of his hallmarks. He loved to bring warring parties together. He loved to foster reconciliation. So he went, actually, with the Crusaders in the year 1219. He went, it was during the 5th Crusade, he went to Egypt with them, and he went to minister to their spiritual needs, to speak with them about Christ, about the gospel. But in particular, he wanted to meet the Muslims, and he wanted to speak with them. So that was really a different way of approaching the enemy at the time, that he wanted to dialogue. So he actually did that. He went into the camp of the Muslims, and he was captured, and he requested to be taken to their leader, and he was taken to Sultan al-Kamil, who was known to be a man who liked to dialogue as well, who likes to be kind of a philosophical man who liked to speak with people who were from different backgrounds. And they had an exchange of mutual respect. And we actually have contemporary accounts of what happened. We don't have the exact words that they exchanged, but they had a moment of dialogue. And Francis went with the intention of sharing his faith. He went with the intention of sharing the love of Christ with the Sultan. He wanted to bring peace into the situation. And though the Sultan did not convert to Christianity, as Francis would have loved if that had happened, but they did have an exchange of respect. And the Sultan respected him enough to protect him and to send him back into the camp of the Christians. And I just wanted to share a little quotation from the first rule of St. Francis, when he addresses how he wanted his brothers to reach out to the Muslims. And I think in what he did with the Sultan, you can see he was living out these instructions. So he wrote, "As for the brothers who go among the Muslims, Let them live spiritually among the Saracens and non-believers in two ways. One way is not to engage in arguments or disputes, but rather to be subject to every human creature for God's sake, and to acknowledge that they are Christians. The other way is to announce the word of God when they see that it may please the Lord. So St. Francis was advocating this way of dialogue, where he was not asking his brothers to hide their faith. He wanted them to be themselves. He wanted them to speak about Christ when it seemed opportune, when it seemed like God was calling them to do that. But he wanted them to be subject to every human creature for God's sake. So not to be conflictual, not to be confrontational, but really to encounter the other in their otherness, and just get to know, where is this person coming from? What do they believe? And to respect that and really learn from it. So that's kind of, when I first started learning about interreligious dialogue, that was a motivation for me to really give myself to what is this all about, because I knew that St. Francis had this sense of dialogue. He didn't believe in the way of violence as kind of a proposed way to solve difficult situations. He was a peace-loving man of dialogue. So I really wanted to just kind of walk you through what the document says about interreligious dialogue, and that will be kind of most of my time, but then I'd like to share with you just a little bit of what I did when I was in Rome working at the dicastery. So, as I mentioned, Nostra Aetate was very revolutionary, and it's the shortest document of the Second Vatican Council. It's called a declaration. And really, the Council Fathers debated quite a bit about what the document should be, what it should say. And this was, we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but this was kind of the final result of a lot of prayer and reflection and discussion among the Council Fathers. So there are 5 paragraphs in the document, and the first one, the introductory paragraph, urges us to recognize our common humanity. So the document states that we are all sons and daughters of the one Father, our one Father Creator, and that we all have the same questions about life. We're all asking, who are we? Where are we going? What is the purpose of our life? Why do we have to die? What is death? And what happens afterwards? And the document calls all of these questions the unsolved riddles of human existence. And it says that various religious paths are all trying to answer these fundamental questions of human existence. And I think that the church is really showing a lot of humility that maybe had not been the norm for Catholics when encountering people who are different up to this point, and saying that we are all in front of the mystery of life. We all are seeking. We don't have we as Catholics don't have like a total grasp of what is true about reality. We also are confronted with these riddles, just like every other human being who has ever lived. The second paragraph talks about the rays of truth of other religions. And the Council Fathers say that rather than dismiss people who believe differently, or even ridicule them, or persecute them, or disparage their deeply held beliefs, we should encounter them with openness. We should approach them with respect. We should have wonder at the various ways that people strive towards the divine. And we should thank God that human beings are looking for ways to reach God. And the document acknowledges that many religions, even those that we normally think of as polytheistic, actually are worshiping a supreme being. So even if they have many different beliefs about the divine, they recognize kind of one supreme divine figure. So that's something that we have in common. And the Council Fathers say that though we differ in our beliefs, these other religious paths often reflect a ray of that truth which enlightens all men. So the truth of God, the life of God, enlighten all men, and these different religious paths reflect a ray of that truth. The document also says that we as Catholics should work to preserve the good things found in other religions. So again, rather than kind of uphold the good things that we have as Catholics, we should also recognize the good in other religious paths and strive even to preserve them, because they are reflections of that, the ray, they are rays of the truth that comes from God. In the third paragraph of the document, we get into a bit of thornier issues because this paragraph is about relationship with the Muslims, and the Council Fathers recognize the long history of violence and conflict that has kind of marred our relations with Muslims. But they point out that Muslims worship one God, as we do, and also that Muslims honor Jesus as a prophet, that they honor Mary, even look to them as models. And Muslims are very much concerned with living a just life, with living an upright life before God. And we share religious practices with them, as you may know, they also have this commitment to prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. Actually, currently, we are doing with them because they are in their holy month of Ramadan right now, as we are in our season of fasting in Lent. And the Council Fathers also say that we should work with Muslims for peace and justice. The next paragraph is about relationship with the Jews, and this is the longest part of the document. And actually, the document has its genesis kind of in this desire and this need to work on a reconciliation with the Jewish people. So it is by far the longest part of the document. And the Declaration acknowledges that Christianity and the Church's faith has roots in the Jewish religion, in the Jewish people. And it talks about Abraham and the patriarchs, and it talks about how the apostles were all Jewish, and of course how Jesus was Jewish. And it says something very important, that God never repents or kind of draws back on the call that he gives to people and the covenants that he makes with them. So recognizing that the covenant with the Jewish people is still there, and it's still close to God's heart, that he does not repent of that special relationship with his people, the Jews. And a quote from this paragraph is, "The Sacred Synod wants to foster and recommend that mutual understanding and respect, which is the fruit, above all, of biblical and theological studies, as well as fraternal dialogue." So the church is kind of asking that Catholics engage in more study and become more knowledgeable about the Hebrew Scriptures and about the Jewish religion. Also, really importantly, the church repudiates the charge of deicide that had often been leveled against the Jewish people. So the Jewish people, the church says, should not be blamed for the death of Christ. And they should not be presented as somehow rejected or cursed by God because of the death of Jesus. And pastors should be very careful, and those who teach our faith should be careful about how they instruct the people about this. In very strong language, the document announces all kinds of persecution, anti-Semitism, hatred, or any kind of even ridicule or anything kind of violent in whatever fashion that targets Jewish people. And the document concludes with an exhortation to peace, that we must learn how to dialogue and to be with, to encounter others who are different, if we are to foster the peace that God desires for all of his children. And the document ends by kind of recognizing, again, we are all God's children. God is our Father and wants us to live in peace with one another. So just to kind of address one maybe common misunderstanding about Nostra Aetate, or the church's teaching on interreligious dialogue, that the church is not asking Christians or Catholics to somehow be less Catholic or less Christian, or not to fully believe what we believe. But rather, the church always has the mission, the call to speak of Christ, to share what we believe about Jesus, as he commanded us to do. She must do this in a way that respects others, in a way that respects others' freedom, and sees the goodness in other people and in the religious paths that they have chosen or that they have inherited. That's kind of a summary of the document, and I wanted to share just a little bit about how Nostra Aetate came about. And as I mentioned before, it was originally conceived as a way of trying to heal and reconcile, even make reparation for what happened to the Jewish people during World War II. So the church and Christians in many places were really heartbroken, horrified about the Shoah and the slaughter of the Jewish people. And some Christians were honest enough to really look at what were the problems within Christianity that contributed to a kind of environment or a kind of culture in which this could be possible. So the church, Christians, some Catholics started to look at what were those strains of anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism within the church that contributed to the Shoah. And not that the church wanted to take on the full responsibility for what happened, but what was our part and how are we going to try to reconcile or repair that. So there were actually, even before World War II, some converts to Catholicism, so Hebrew Catholics who were working within the church to try to kind of allay some of these issues of anti-Judaism within the church. There was a group called Amici Israel that in the 1920s made a petition to Pope Pius XI asking that the Good Friday prayer about the Jewish people be changed. During the Good Friday intercessions, at that time, the Jews were called perfidious or faithless, and that charge of deicide was leveled against them. And Catholics were instructed not to genuflect when praying for the Jewish people. And actually, when this group made the petition, and there were others who were making this petition to change that language, they were not successful. There were many theologians within the Roman Curia and others who really squashed that suggestion, and Pius XI did not end up acting on that. It was only with Pope John the 23rd in the year 1960 that intercession was changed. I wanted to speak briefly about Pope John the 23rd because it was really a lot of his personal impetus that made Nostra Aetate possible. And how much time do I have left? 5 minutes? Okay. Pope John the 23rd was always very sympathetic to the Jewish people, and during World War II, he was the papal nuncio in Turkey. And he was really collaborating with others to save many Jewish people. He had baptismal certificates forged for Jews and just worked with some of the royalty in Europe to help with saving some of them, some thousands. In 1960, there was a really important meeting between John the 23rd and a Jewish historian named Jules Isaac, and his wife and I believe maybe daughter or son, were killed in death camps during World War II. And at that time, he had not really researched this before, but he started to research anti-Judaism within Christianity because he was looking for a way to understand this horror that had happened. And he produced a book called The Teaching of Contempt, which kind of documented how church leaders and how just the church and Christians had this attitude towards the Jewish people that was contemptuous, that was basically, as I was saying before, leveling all these kinds of charges against them of deicide and really stirring up the Christian community to keep up this kind of persecution of the Jews. So when he had this meeting with John the 23rd, he shared with him a lot of what he had researched and this teaching of contempt that had been such a strong strain within Christianity. And he actually wrote about this, and I read some of his journal, which I won't quote right now, but it's really amazing how it's really heartbreaking to hear. He speaks about how Jewish people had been enclosed in not just physical ghettos, but spiritual ghettos by Christians throughout the ages. And John the 23rd was really moved, and he didn't really need convincing so much, but he was moved to really act quickly because of what Jules Isaac presented to him. And it was almost right away that he asked Cardinal Bea, who was at the head of the Office for Ecumenism, or Christian Unity, he asked him to begin to work on a document that would kind of help with this reconciliation and making reparation in the context of the Second Vatican Council, which was in its planning phases. So this document went through many drafts, and there were controversies and politics involved, and then it became not just a declaration on our relationship with the Jewish people, but with all religions for various reasons. But it came to be. And Nostra Aetate is such a short, kind of simple document, but it was really a seed for a lot that began to happen. A lot of relationships that began to be formed between Catholics and church leaders and members of other religions. And now the Holy See relates to people from about 12 different religions throughout the world in various ways of kind of working together and what we can do together to promote peace and justice in the world. One little part that I had in that, when I was at the dicastery, we started an interreligious network of women. So historically, interreligious dialogues have been done mostly by men. But when I was there, we had a conference that was totally devoted to women and dialogue. And it was really amazing to see how women are fostering ties and bonds among people of different religions in very difficult situations throughout the world. And kind of working in a dialogue capacity that is very natural to us as women. So, as you may know, Pope John Paul II was very much an advocate of interreligious dialogue, and he was also an advocate for women and their roles in the church. And he wrote beautifully about what we call the feminine genius, which is basically a capacity for the other, a capacity to really relate to the wholeness of another person. And so in our work in the dicastery, which is ongoing and we're still meeting with this network of women, we see and discover over and over again that women have this particular capacity to dialogue on many levels, so not simply intellectually, but just in the way they relate to others. We have that openness to the other, which is a great asset in any kind of dialogue, but an interreligious dialogue as well. And I could speak more about that, but I think I should stop. Okay? Thank you all.
Just want to thank Sister Grace Marie real quick, and thank you for sharing a brief but profound synopsis of Nostra Aetate and the work that you're involved with, and bringing to light some of the serious issues that surround the formation of this document. And now to hear the impact of Nostra Aetate, and along with some personal experience, we have Rabbi Kotak to share with us. Thank you, Rabbi.
Good evening. I want to thank Sister Grace Marie, Dr. Dennis for putting this together, my student, Deacon Ari, Father Hernandez for his friendship over the years, and the incredible blessing that I've had being here teaching for the past 10 years. We are really on, all of us, a remarkable spiritual journey as we learn together the wonder of Nostra Aetate, its promise and potential. Even as 60 years later, we are sitting here tonight where the knowledge of it is really quite limited, certainly among the broader world. It was a really earth-shattering document, a true miracle, impacting 1900 years of horrific history. As we reflect today on both the promise and the pain, we must begin with words of thanks, blessing, and prayer. A unique Jewish prayer that is said each time we experience something new and unique. The Shechianu is a Jewish expression of gratitude for reaching special, new, or infrequent occasions. It says, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shechianu v'kiyimanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. Blessed are you, Lord our God, sovereign of the universe, who have kept us in life, sustained us, and brought us to this special moment in time. And you may be pondering in your own minds what is so special about this evening and about the past 60 years. Nostra Aetate revolutionized the world of Jewish-Catholic relations forever by initiating a healing of the first 1900 years of history of anti-Jewish teaching and practices of the Roman Church. I celebrate Nostra Aetate, but I am caught by having to address the past that this document addresses head-on and changes direction and degree. Sister Grace referenced some of the points. Let me make them very clear. The church had taught that it was the new Israel, which had replaced the Jewish people in God's covenant. Jews were often blamed for the death of Jesus, a charge that led to severe discrimination and violence. Despite persecution, the church historically held that Jews should be permitted to exist as a humiliated witness to the truth of Christianity and the Old Testament. The Declaration stated that the death of Christ would not be laid at the door of all Jews then living, nor could it be charged against Jews of today. I want you to think about how incredibly profound that statement is. It affirmed that God has not revoked the eternal covenant with the Jewish people, acknowledging the spiritual richness of Judaism. Think of how remarkable that statement is. Nostra Aetate explicitly condemned hatred, persecution, and anti-Semitism against Jews. It called for dialogue, understanding, and respect between Catholics and Jews, recognizing shared roots in Abraham and the Bible. Before Vatican II, centuries of Catholic teaching viewed Judaism as superseded by Christianity, leading to the persecution and focus on converting Jews who were seen to be in error in their faith. The Holocaust, as Sister Grace points out, spurred a reevaluation within the Church itself that culminated in Vatican II and Nostra Aetate. The Declaration marked a radical turning point, moving the Church away from supersessionism and fostering a new era of interfaith dialogue and improved relationships, as seen in later documents and actions by the Vatican itself. Nostra Aetate, on the highest levels of the Catholic Church, changed everything in relationship to the Jewish people. The ongoing challenge, even 60 years later, is that the message and the teaching of Nostra Aetate entered the souls, and has it entered the souls of Catholic parishioners, of those of you who are here tonight, your friends and your families. How many of you have really learned and seen the document itself to see how it may transform the way the future unfolds? When I was a young boy, my best friend Jerry Kermer, a Roman Catholic of deep faith, was not permitted to come to temple with me prior to Vatican II. The impact of Vatican II and Nostra Aetate was on many, many different levels in the Church and without it. Vatican II's general reaction, the broader council faced internal resistance, primarily over liturgical changes like the Latin Mass and Church authority. Nostra Aetate's reactions ranged from the document facing intense geopolitical pressure from Middle Eastern bishops, initially opposed drafts out of fear that recognizing Judaism would be interpreted as political support for the state of Israel and thereby put in danger Catholics living in Arab nations. There are many levels of dissent. Most of the 16 documents passed with overwhelming majorities in Vatican II. Nostra Aetate was one of the most contentious documents, receiving the highest number of negative votes, between 10 and 12% of the Council Fathers, who rejected it on theological grounds. Nostra Aetate is often described as a radical revolution or a 360-degree about-face. It specifically overturned centuries of Gentile Christian hatred for Jews and deicide. Nostra Aetate's reception. This document received significant external praise from Jewish, Muslim, and secular leaders for its condemnation of anti-Semitism and its call for mutual respect. It is often called, and I quote, the moral heart of the Council. It was not without serious consequences. It is said that 100,000 priests worldwide quit the Church. There were then 422,000 and 100,000 left, along with 90,000 nuns who left the worldwide Church. Of the priests who left, there were 25,000 here in the United States. It truly was an emotional, and reactions ran enormously high internally. For my community, it totally influenced the relationship of Catholics and Jews on an institutional level. Judaism, like all faiths, is diverse in practice. Within our community, since the beginnings of modernity, with Napoleon ushering emancipation of Jews in the 19th century, the three streams of interpretation of Jewish practice and focus were developed: Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox, each in their own reactions to modernity. In practice, it was dominantly the reforming movement that took the leadership in interreligious dialogue and engagement. My 5-year seminary training program leading to ordination at the Hebrew New College Rabbinical School included all of the historic rabbinic teaching sacred texts, but also included courses on Catholic Church, Christian Bible, the Synoptic Gospels, to make us prepared to engage and build bridges of understanding and respect in our rabbinates. I was fortunate to be able to continue those studies in later graduate work. Interreligious activities became an important part of my past ordination focus in the communities I served and in my academic pursuits. It led me to serve on the interface of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, to serve on the executive of the National Conference of Christians and Jews, to be welcomed in the Vatican with Cardinal Keeler, Baltimore, all with the hope and prayer of making Nostra Aetate a living reality. As I have been so fortunate to be here at St. Vincent de Paul for the past 10 years. A sad story of impact. As I mentioned, I was fortunate to serve on the executive of the Synagogue Council of America, which was the religious representation of Judaism to other faith communities. It was represented by rabbis from the Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform movements. In 1963, Rav Soloveitchik, who was the acknowledged Talmudic scholar of the Orthodox community, issued a heter, a ruling, stating that Orthodox members of our executive, and by extension all of us, were limited to only communal cooperation on secular or social justice issues, but discussions regarding theological dialogue were prohibited. In 1994, our Catholic counterparts wanted to move into theological discussions, which the Orthodox representations wouldn't do. As a result, the Synagogue Council of America folded and disappeared. Other groups have since tried to carry on that important dialogue, but without the Orthodox Jewish voice. As I celebrate this anniversary, I have many questions. Does the Catholic in the pew know about Nostra Aetate? Has the teaching been carried into the parish churches? Do all Catholic seminarians learn the message and the implementation of Nostra Aetate in their own studies? We are all too aware of the epidemic worldwide rise of anti-Semitism and acts of violence against synagogues and Jews in recent days. How do we respond? How do we uproot this systemic hatred? Nostra Aetate condemned this hatred. It formally decried hatred, persecution, displays of anti-Semitism directed against Jews at any time and by anyone. How much we need to embrace and publish that message far and wide, even more so in the days that we are living in. I am hopeful as I trust in God to give us strength and insight to root out the evils of our world. Recall with me the message of Psalm 133 as we look for direction and hope this night. Hine ma tov u'manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Behold how good and how pleasant it is for brothers and sisters to dwell together in unity. Ken yehi ratzon, thus may it be so. Thank you.
enlightening us. And as you all heard, there is a long history of real pain that, if you're just learning about Judaism for the first time, or a question arises in your heart about some of the topics that were presented tonight, I really encourage you to read this document, to enrich your understanding, or at least follow that inspiration to know more, to understand better the other. And that is a desire and inspiration that comes from God, for us to dwell in peace and seek justice for all. So thank you to our presenters. There's more to come. We'll take a 15-minute break now. Again, take advantage of the snacks, beverages, and coffee and or dessert. And we'll return with a 20-minute question and answer session. So thank you all for your attention, patience, and prayers.
Huh? I'm trying to pause it.